Hi, this is Angelo the grumpy old IT guy. Well, that's right, you heard me, the grumpy old IT guy. And welcome to my grumpy podcast string functions. This is the 6th podcast of my beginning TSQL podcast series. And this podcast has only one demo that reinforces each topic, so pay attention, guys. And by the way, there'll be 2 other series of podcasts, which I hope you'll find useful and helpful. There's the intermediate TSQL podcasts, where we look at things like table locks and transactions, and then advanced TSQL, where we look at things like pivot queries and advanced statistical and analytical windowing queries. And after taking this series, you'll be able to perform development tasks associated with a TSQL developer, or maybe even a data architect. And maybe you might even get a job. Well, and here's a little grumpy alert. This podcast will only cover the basics, so look to my fall 2020 Grumpy University for in-depth courses on these topics. Okay, by now you're probably saying, who is this grumpy old IT guy anyway? Well, that would be me. I'm a published author and data architect with over 30 years of experience in BI, data architecture, data warehousing, and data modeling. Now, BI stands for Business Intelligence. In the last 10 years, I've also participated in several large-scale master data and data quality initiatives. And to support these, I've achieved CIMP certification in master data and data quality. Now, I do love the Microsoft BI stack, and I've been using SQL Server for more years I care to mention. Now, does anyone remember SQL Server 2000? Well, I go back even earlier than that. And I can just hear you guys grumbling out there and saying, boy, this guy's dating himself. Well, that's okay. After all, I'm the grumpy old IT guy. Now, lastly, I hold a master's degree in computer science and a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering way back when Pratt Institute had an engineering program. Ah, yes, there's some applause. And by the way, I'm now the founder and president of Grumpy Old IT Guy. And I'll be bringing Grumpy University to you this fall with a whole bunch of in-depth courses on the SQL Server BI stack. So let's get ready to learn the grumpy way. Okay, let's get started. Now, string functions allow us to manipulate text strings. So for example, we can find out the length of a string. We can pull the leftmost end characters from a string, and we can also pull the rightmost end characters from a string. And then we can trim the leading or trailing characters of a string like blanks. Now we can find the position of a character within a string, that'll come in handy, and we can pull a subset of the string. And we can also replace a set of strings with a string. Now these are just a few of the many string manipulation functions you'll need in your day-to-day programming and data manipulation activities. In my full course, I'll be covering more of these and give a lot of interesting demos. Now, if you're involved in ETL projects, by the way, and ETL stands for extraction, transformation, and loading, then you'll use these TSQL functions in your store procedures, batch scripts, and even in SSIS ETL packages. And by the way, SSIS stands for SQL Server Integration Services, which is Microsoft's premier ETL tool. So again, we're only going to look at 8 of these most popular functions, the length and the left and right function. You can guess what these do by their names, and the LTRIM, the left trim, and RTRIM, which stands for right trim. And finally, CHARINDEX, SUBSTRING, and replace. So these are the workhorse functions that you need to learn to get started in string manipulation and data cleansing. Well, let's start with the length function first. Now we pass the function a string delimited by a single quotes or a string variable, and it will return the length of the string. So it's pretty simple. And notice in the example we declare a small integer variable which will hold a length value called &len. And our second string variable is called &string. So pretty clever names, right guys? And notice how we initialize ampersand string variable to the string "this is a string." Now we can also use a separate set statement to initialize a variable with a value. Either method works, so take your pick. Try to be consistent though in all your code. Data encoding standards do count. Now finally, we use a select clause to set the ampersand length variable to the length of the string and print out the value. And notice the use of the convert function to convert the ampersand length variable to a variable character string. Remember, the length variable is a small integer, so we need to convert it to a string. Now we need to do this as we are concatenating two variables together. And that's pretty much all that there is to it. Next, we look at the left function. Now this function returns the leftmost number of characters in a string, so we need to specify the number of characters we want. Now we simply declare a string variable called ampersand string again. So again, a clever name on my part. And we use a select clause to return the leftmost number of characters in the string 3 times. The first example returns the leftmost 7 characters from our variable. Then the second example returns the leftmost 5. And finally, the third example returns the leftmost 2 characters from the variable. Now I think you can guess that if there's a left function, then there should be a right function. So yes, you guessed correctly. And oh, by the way, these functions can be combined with each other, more than one function, so to deliver powerful string manipulations and cleansing routines. And we're going to see this in our clips and in our demo. Okay, here's the right function. Now this function returns the rightmost number of characters in a string. As was the case with the left function, we need to specify the number of characters we want. Now this will return the number of specified characters starting from the last character. So we work backwards. Again, we simply declare a string variable called ampersand string. You can use any name you want, obviously. Now, did I tell you I came up with clever names? And we use a select clause to return the rightmost number of characters in the string 3 times. So the first example returns the rightmost characters from our variable, and then the second returns the rightmost 6, and finally the third example returns the rightmost 3 characters from our variable. Now by now you might be asking, what good is all this? Well, you'll see as we progress in this podcast. Okay, let's get a trim. Well, trim our strings, that is, and this is a fairly handy function, I think. Now, if we have any blank spaces in the beginning of our string, and we want to get rid of them, then the LTRIM function is our tool. And you can probably guess LTRIM stands for left trim. In our example, again, we declare our old friend the string variable called ampersand string, and its data type is VARCHAR, right? VARCHAR stands for variable character, and its length is 128 characters. Now I select the string first so you can see the blank spaces in front of the string, and then I use a second select clause in order to use the LTRIM function to get rid of the blanks. Okay, pretty neat and pretty simple. And what do we have here? We have a grumpy note. So this function is a handy tool like the other ones for any ETL process, like loading data warehouses. And again, ETL stands for extraction, transformation, and load. And I'll mention it again, Microsoft has a really neat tool called SQL Server Integration Services, a very powerful ETL tool. Well, as I said before, if we have an LTRIM, what do we have next? Now, if we have any blank spaces in the end of our string and we want to get rid of them, well, the rtrim function does the trick. rtrim stands for right trim. Okay, you probably guessed it. Now, our example, just like the others, declares the usual string variable called ampersand string, data type varchar, variable character, length of 128. Just did a little cutting or copy and paste job for these. And just because we declared a data length of 128, by the way, doesn't mean we have to use it. We can use up to 128, but if we don't, no space is wasted because unused space is not allocated memory. Right, so it's a good data type to consider using. Now again, I select the string first so you can see the blank spaces at the end of the string. And then I use a second select clause in order to use the LTRIMO function to get rid of the blanks. So you can notice that there's a blanks in the front and blanks in the end of the string. So no problem, we'll just embed the LTRIMO function within the LTRIMO function and everything is cleaned up. So it's pretty neat. And you can see though that as you start using all of these functions together to do some sort of a string cleansing or manipulation or fixing strings, it can get complicated. So please use comments liberally. Okay, the char index function character index. Now we really get low level. What if you want to find the position of a character in a string or a symbol like an exclamation point? Well, then the tool of choice is the char index function. Simply pass the character or symbol surrounded by a single quote as the first parameter to the function. And the second parameter is the string itself. So execute the function like in a select statement, and the position of the character is returned. Okay, pretty tricky, but who cares? Well, we'll see as we proceed. Next, we look at a function that returns a part of a string. The function is called SUBSTRING, and it takes 3 parameters. The first parameter is the string you want to pull the substring from. The second parameter is the starting position in the string. And the third parameter is the ending position in the string. Now, if you want to start at position 1 and want the first 10 characters, it's a fairly simple job. But what if you need to start somewhere in the middle of the string and want to pull only a subset based on a character that appears somewhere to the right of the starting position? So this is where the CHARINDEX function comes in handy that we just looked at. We can use it to find the position of a character that identifies the start position of the string that we want to pull out. And then we need to add a 1 to it so we have the actual starting position of the substring we want. Okay, now if we want all the characters till the end of the character string, we simply calculate the number of characters of the substring by subtracting the starting position from the length of the string. And for that, we can use the length function, right? That'll tell us how long the string is. And then we just subtract the starting position of that character. And by the way, just make sure you comment code when nesting or embedding functions within functions, because it can get pretty complicated. Now, what if we have some characters in a string that we want to change to another set of characters? Well, the replace function is added to our string toolkit. Now this function takes 3 parameters, the string we want to modify, the substring we want to replace, and the substring we want to replace it with. So once again, since our string has blank characters in the front, we use the LTRIMO function to return the cleansed string, and then we replace the substring, also a mess, with a string a neat. And our result is this is a neat string. Now notice how increasingly powerful these examples get as we can embed functions within functions to manipulate and clean string data. Okay, so there's the results once you execute this function. We started off that this is also a messy string, and we ended up with this is a neat string. Okay, so ETL anybody? Here's a little grumpy note again. Please make sure you use comments when logic becomes complex and nested functions. And all right, I know you've been waiting for this moment. Here's our one and only demo on selected string function. Okay, here's our one and only demo. So let's bring up SQL Server Management Studio and let's get going. Let's see, let's go into our test database here. And I'll use test. We're not going to really be writing or creating any tables. We'll just be manipulating some strings, but I always like to use a database other than the master database. We don't want to use that. So in this case, this is kind of a a Scratch database for prototyping and testing. But this will be a fairly easy demo. These functions are straightforward. So here's the length function. I'm declaring that variable ampersand a string, varchar 256. I'm then setting it with the set function to, this is a fairly long and boring string. Okay, very straightforward. So now I'm going to select the string. The length of this string is, and I'm going to concatenate it. Okay, so here's a couple of functions actually. I'm going to use the len function. That's the subject of this part of the demo. I'm passing it the a string. So length will return the string. Then I'm using the, length will return the length of the string. I'm converting that number to a variable character. I'm concatenating it to the first part of the message. The length of the string is. Then it's concatenating the length, and then I'm concatenating it at the end with the word space characters. Okay, so that's it. Now sometimes some people might find this format a little easier to follow. Put everything on a separate line so you see all the different pieces that are being concatenated. But let's execute this all in one batch. I need to highlight that string, that declaration variable, right? Because, well, I'll show you. Sometimes I forget, and watch what happens. Get a big old error message. All right, so let's just highlight this little batch. And there it is. The length of the string is 40 characters. Very good. Okay. All right, how about the left function? All right, so, whoops, here we go. I'm always, you guys who've seen my demos before, I'm fast with this scrolling. So the left function is, again, I'm taking that same string. This is a fairly long and boring string, all right? And I actually am using the same format. The first 10 characters of this string are. I'm using the left function there. I'm passing it the variable ampersand a string. The number 10, I want the first 10 characters, or the left 10 characters. I'm going to convert that again to a varchar, and I get the message, the first 10 characters of this string are. So let's see what they are. So the first 10 characters of this string are, this is A. Okay, what if I copy and paste this just to reinforce the topic here? The first 4 characters of the string are, and I'm just going to change this to 4. Now notice I get a little red squiggly line. That's because I have a go terminator here, and this select statement does not recognize the variable. So let me copy it here so we don't have to execute both queries at the same time. So there you go. The first character of the string, the first 4 characters of the string are the word this. Very good. Okay, let's scroll down. The right function. Really the same thing, all right? Same variable, same message. The last 7 characters of this string are, I'm selecting that, and I'm using the right function this time, passing it the a string, ampersand a string variable, and I want the rightmost 7 characters. So what am I going to get? Well, let's see. I get the last characters of the string are string exclamation point. Okay, so that's very easy and obvious to use. How about the LTRIM function? So notice I have our old friend, the a string variable, varchar 256, and I have a few blank characters in front of the word this. So I want to eliminate those, all right? So I'm going to select the string first, so we see what it looks like. Then I'm going to select LTRIM a string. And then I have the message, after removing leading blanks, the string is LTRIM a string. Let's see what we get. All right, so there it is. Now, from the output, it's pretty, maybe not obvious what this looks like. So a way to really check out if this worked is to put another comment here. All right, let's copy this result. Put another single quote here if I can. Paste it in here. So notice that, well, it's still not obvious because I have this part of the sentence here after removing leading blanks, the string is, but notice that the leading blanks were gone, right? So if I take this part away, the message, then you can see that those leading blanks were removed. So let's do the same thing with the RTRIM function, right? No need to really go over this in too much detail. There's our message, there's our string variable, and there's our RTRIM function at the end here. So let's execute it. So there you go. After removing the trailing blanks, there's the string at the bottom here, and all those blanks are indeed gone. Now, how about a situation where I have, oops, again, real fast scrolling on my laptop. I have a situation where I have leading and trailing blanks here. Notice I have a whole bunch of leading blanks and trailing blanks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to embed the RTRIM function within the LTRIM. So I'm going to do an RTRIM first of a string and then an LTRIM. So I should get a nice clean function. And let me do it two ways, all right? I'm going to cut and paste this, or copy and paste this string. Just paste it right below. Let me get rid of the message too so that it becomes really obvious that the string was cleansed. So let's execute this little batch. There's all my results down there. Notice the first string shows the, this is a fairly long and boring string. Then this is a fairly long and boring string, right? So the LTRIM and RTRIM worked. And actually, I take it back. See, I didn't even need this. This is an extra duplicate. I forgot I have it up here. And then it basically removed those leading and trailing edges. All right, let's look at the CHARINDEX function. Very easy to use. Okay, I'm going to do a whole bunch of things here. What I'm doing is I'm declaring a string. This is a boring string with an exclamation point. And I want to find the first space. So in other words, the space right after the word this. All right, let me just execute it. Just the first part of this batch. So found a space character at position 5. So now what I want to do is to set the ampersand word variable there, the varchar 64, to the left of the string, and I want the space position, which was returned by the CHARINDEX -1. So the word or the token I pulled out should be the word is, and let's find out. Let's highlight this batch now. So notice that it again found the space in character position 5, and it pulled out the word this. So now I am going to set the string, I'm going to reset it to the right of the string, and I'm going to calculate how many spaces I want, all right? I'm going to take the length of the string with the len function. I'm going to subtract the ampersand space position, which is 5, and I should get, let's see, I should get a space character at position, or I'm sorry, I should get is a boring string. So let me highlight both of these together, execute it. So notice what I'm doing. I'm breaking out each part of each word in the string using a combination of these functions that we learned. Okay, here we go with the scrolling again. All right, So just to recap, the first time we pulled the word this, then we pulled the right of the string. So now we have is a boring string. And we're going to just keep repeating this pattern of char indexes and conversions. All right, so let me highlight everything. What I want to do is to pull out every single piece of this sentence. So I'm going to just execute this all in one go. So notice all of the words were pulled out. There's the result. Starting from the top, we pulled out the word this. Then we pulled the right of it as a boring string. Then we looked for the next space, and we found it as at position 3. So if you look at is a boring string, the first space is at position 3. We pulled the word is out. Then we pulled a boring string. Then we found the next space. Then we got the word a. Then finally a boring string. And then finally at the end we got the very last word with the exclamation point. So I really didn't go through all this code because it was just a repetition. So once again, just at the top, I will go over the top part of it. All right, I got the left function to find, well actually I got the char index function to find the first space. Then I printed out what it was. Then I used the left function to pull out the word. Then I reset the string to the right of the original A string, and I calculated the number of characters by calculating the length of the string minus that space position which I generated with the char index, and then I selected the results. And then I just kept going and doing pretty much the same thing. So this is a good way of showing you how you can just use these functions within each other, nested within each other, to perform specific tasks. Let me scroll down real slow. So topic 7 is the substring function. Okay, let's scroll back up here. No, I scrolled too far. No, I didn't. So here's the substring function. All right, what I want to do with the substring function is, again, I've got this string, this variable a string set to this is a boring string. And what I want to do now is the same thing that I did before, but I want to pull out those words and put them in something called a table variable. Okay, a table variable looks like a table, but it's stored in the TempDB database, and it disappears once the batch that you executed is finished, all right? So there it is, declare ampersand word table as a table, has one column, word, varchar 64. So I'm basically going to do almost the same thing. I'm going to find the char index of the first space. I'm going to print it out. Then I'm going to set the variable word, which is a varchar 64, to the left of the string using that space position -1, right? We found a space at, I believe it was position 5. So we really just want space position -1. We want those 4 characters, the word this, TIHS. So I print it out. All right, I'll scroll down with the arrow key, and I insert it into the word table. Insert into ampersand word table values ampersand word. So look, it behaves just like a table, right? Use the same insert statement. So now I need to pull the substring, okay? I need to use the substring to pull the next word. So I'm going to pass it that a string variable. I'm going to take that space of position, all right, which is a 5. I'm going to add 1 so that now in the sentence I'm going to start at the first character of the word is, all right, and I'm going to calculate the length I want to pull. So it's the length of the string minus that space position. It's going to print it out. Then, now remember, now since we pulled out the substring, our first space is now going to be between the word is and a, right? We pulled out is a boring string. So now I want to find that position. I want, again, the position of the first space in the shortened string, which is a boring string, so that I can pull the word is out. So now I just basically do the same logic. I execute the char index. I only want to start at position 1 of the string. All right. And it says select found a space character at position. And then I convert the position to a string. Then I set the word equals to the left of a string. And that space position -1. And then I reinsert it into the values. So now I should have 2 words there. All right, so let me execute this entire sequence of commands with the declaration, because they're repetitious. So all I'm doing is finding the position of the space, pulling out the substring, then I'm just pulling out the word, then I'm resetting the string so that it includes everything except the word we just pulled out. So I'm going to go all the way down here. All right, and then at the very end, I'm going to select everything from the word table. So let's execute it. And let's see our results here. So there they are. Found a space character at position 5. The word is this. The string was modified to is a boring string. Then found a space character at position 3 of that modified string. The word is. Then I remodified the string with a new starting position using that char index return value, and I get a boring string. Right? Then found a space character at position 2. I pulled out the word a, and then did the same thing, pulled out boring, and pulled out the string with the exclamation. And there at the very end, you see the final results when I queried that little table variable. There's the words. This is a boring string. Okay, so now you're starting to see how you can start parsing out strings and storing them in tables so that you can do any kind of manipulation that's required in your ETL or data cleansing. All right, and last but not least, the replace function. Very easy. Let's just declare our old friend ampersand a string. We'll set the string to this is a fairly long and boring string. And then we'll print the results as now the string is more interesting. And what are we doing? We're taking the replace function, passing it to string, then the text that we want to replace with the word interesting. Let's execute it. There it is. Now the string is more interesting, and this is a fairly long and interesting string. So that's it. Now you know how to use all these important string functions. Okay, congratulations, you made it. Let's start wrapping things up. We examined just a few of the string functions that allow us to manipulate and manage strings. And we discussed some examples of functions that display the length of the string, display the left or rightmost end characters of a string. And we also looked at functions that trim the leading characters of a string like blanks. And we also looked at functions that trim the trailing characters of a string with the rtrim function. And next we learned how to find the position of a character within a string with the char index function. And then we learned how to pull out a subset of the string with substring. And finally we learned how to replace a set of characters within a string. So again, these were just a few of the many string manipulation functions that are part of SQL Server's built-in systems functions for text and character data manipulation and management. Now I'll discuss more of these in my full courses and other podcasts. Now if you're involved in ETL projects, which stand for extraction, transformation, and loading, you'll use these TSQL functions in your stored procedures, batch scripts, and even in SSIS ETL packages. And I will have a series of podcasts on SSIS and of course some dedicated full-featured courses in the fall in my Grumpy University on SSIS. And just remember, SSIS stands for SQL Server Integration Services which is Microsoft's premier ETL tool. So let's see what other podcasts I have available, starting off with my Tools podcasts. Okay, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I hope you learned the basics of string manipulation, all right, using these functions. And now here's a list of my podcasts for the category of SQL Server tools. So this podcast T01, Installing SQL Server 2019. Okay, this is where you learn how to download and install SQL Server 2019. Then podcast T02 is Installing SQL Server Management Studio, SSMS. So this is the tool we've been using here all along. And podcast T03 is Installing Data Tools 2019. Now Data Tools is it's a component of Visual Studio. All right, so you can manage SQL Server related projects in Visual Studio. Now if you don't have Visual Studio, podcast T04 is the podcast for you. It shows you how to download and install Visual Studio 2019 Community. So that's the free version. We just want to use all the free versions as we learn how to do TSQL and how to install and configure these tools. Podcast T05 is Installing Reporting Services. Now this is another important component of the Microsoft SQL Server BI stack. So this is a full-featured and powerful web reporting services. So basically you can create and display and give access to reports to your users. Now podcast T06 is Installing Report Builder. This is what you're going to use to create those reports for reporting services. And finally podcast T07 is Installing Power BI. So this is a very advanced and powerful graphical tool that allow you to create sophisticated scorecards and dashboards based on SQL Server data, analysis services data, even spreadsheet data and other sources of data. So after installing all these tools, you'll be able to do all of the demos on all of my TSQL podcasts. So please do take the time out to look at these. You'll get a great reward. It'll make your life a lot easier. So let's finally wrap things up. All right, thanks again. That's it. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and I hope you learned the basics of using those string functions. Now here's a list of my available podcasts for the category of TSQL Basics. So podcast 01, hopefully you started off there, is Navigating SSMS. So it shows you how to use the tool we've been using in all these other podcasts. And then podcast 02 through 4 is Creating and Managing Databases, Tables, and Views. And podcast 05 is TSQL DML, Transact SQL Data Manipulation Language. So this is where we learn how to query databases and insert, update, and delete data. Podcast 06, String Functions. Well, it's this podcast we just viewed. And our next podcast is podcast 07, Date Functions. All right, so we'll see all of those built-in functions that Microsoft provided to manipulate dates within your TSQL query. Podcast 08 is the order by clause. So this is a clause you add to your TSQL query to sort your data and much more. And then podcast 09, the group by clause, shows you how to create groups of the data that's returned by a query. Now, what do I mean by groups? So, for example, if a business user comes up to you and says, show me all sales by date, by calendar date, by customer, and by product, okay, those are groupings of data. So when you define these groups, you can add calculations like sum and min, max, and other of the built-in aggregate functions. Okay, so here's a grumpy reminder. Yes, shameless advertising alert. Please be on the lookout this fall for my Grumpy University at grumpyolditguy.com for a complete and savory buffet of TSQL courses to enhance your skills. Okay, see you in podcast 7, Date Functions.